Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines are unchanged. So exam 1, quiz and assignments part 2, deadline 5, March 1st. Exam 2, quiz and assignments part 3, April 5th. Exam 3, exam 4, quiz and assignments part 4, April 26th. And exam 5, if you happen to need it, deadline's Wednesday, finals week at 5 p.m. And again, once you've done all the assignments and quizzes you wish to do, and the 4 exams, you can look at your overall grade, get the grade calculator, put in your best 3 exams, put in your quiz overall grade, your assignment overall grade, and put in a hypothetical 100 for the final to see if it would make a difference. And if it doesn't make a difference, it can't make a difference. Again, if you don't take exam 5, it'd be treated as a 0, but it'd already be dropped, so it wouldn't impact your grade. So not doing stuff never lowers your grade, because anything you haven't done is already treated as a 0. It's already as low as it can be. Upcoming meetings this week, tomorrow 8:30 to 5, so won't be in my office. I'll be at many meetings throughout the day. As far as answer email, maybe. So if you don't hear from me during that time, you're sending emails, that's why. The 21st, 4 to 5, the only impact it'll have is I have to go somewhere for the meeting, so I have to leave my normal office hours, depending how far away it is, 15, 20 minutes early. Okay, before pressing on to the new stuff in Chapter 6, with more exciting fallacies, anything about stuff that has been, or stuff that should be, that needs more. Okay, so last time we were looking at various fallacies, and we saw that the basic idea that all these have in common is, for every fallacy, it's bad logic. So you do have some premises being offered, and a conclusion being offered, but the logical support is lacking. All in the case of these particular fallacies we looked at, what's offered as a pseudo-premise is an emotional appeal, like fear or anger or pity, and the idea is that because of that feeling of fear, anger, or pity, etc., you should just accept the conclusion. But of course, logically, feeling angry doesn't prove a claim. Feeling scared doesn't prove a claim. And then we saw that all of these have, a basic exception, which is you could be feeling an emotion about a legitimate, piece of evidence, a legitimate premise, but that doesn't make it into a fallacy. So there could be a premise that does make you angry, but that when you shouldn't say, gosh, I have this excellent reason to accept this claim, but alas, I feel anger, so it must be a fallacy. No, that isn't false. So it's not that you feel angry that makes it a fallacy or sad, etc. It's that all that's being offered is the emotion and not actual evidence. So if the thing happens to create fear, or pity, etc., and is also good evidence, would not be the fallacy. Now we turn to the new stuff, or new old stuff. Looking at the emotion of pride, guilt, and the worst of all, of course, hope. Apple polishing, also known as appeal to flattery, and as we saw before in the ancient days and before times, there's no international body of standards and naming for fallacies, so depending on what book or website you go to, you may see this as apple polishing or appeal to flattery. Basic idea is this. As with all the other emotion-based fallacies, what is given is something that's supposed to make you feel a certain way. And the idea is that that feeling is supposed to motivate you to accept the conclusion. Now, obviously someone's not going to just say, here's some flattery, accept my claim, because that'd be easy to see through. They'd be like saying, here's my counterfeit money, please accept it. No one who's not insane does that. So with apple polishing, what's done is a person flatters, praises someone, and with the intent of getting them to accept a claim. And if the person accepts this bad reasoning, I am feeling flattered, therefore this claim is true, they have fallen victim to this flattery, this particular fallacy. Now typically this is an offensive fallacy in the sense that it's usually deployed against other people to get them to accept things you want. Now a person could engage in self-deceit and flatter them themselves. So a person can say to themselves, gosh, I'm looking good, therefore I can eat this whole cake. But that would be, I guess it'd be possible, but probably less common. So the usual method is pretty straightforward. You have a claim you want someone to accept, And on the side of evil, the way you do it is you would find something that would appeal to their pride, that would flatter them, that's irrelevant to the claim. So they would accept it as true. For example, centuries ago when I was in grad school, I remember there was, we had a paper due, and it was due like that. And one of my fellow students did not have her paper done. I said, oh, you're going to be in trouble, you don't have your paper done. And she said, no problem, watch this. And she goes to the professor and says, I've been really struggling with this paper because I'm showing why this person who criticizes your view, why they're so wrong. But they're so wrong in so many ways, and your view is so brilliant that I'm just having trouble getting all of their wrongness and all your brilliance in the paper. If I could only have, say, another week to complete it, I could do your genius justice. Now, of course, at this point, everyone should have laughed and said, ha ha ha, appeal to flattery, because everyone's a philosopher in the room. But of course, it worked. She got her week. And got an A in the paper, by the way. So, good job. Now, the reason, of course, that's a fallacy is because, again, praising the person for the brilliance of their view, foolish, sophisticated their enemies, doesn't prove the person's entitled to another week. Proves nothing. So, on the side of evil, the basic tactic is, as always, know your audience. So, what particular weakness does your audience have in terms of their pride? What sort of praise would work most of them? And again, the more you know your audience, the better. Now, of course, if you don't know your audience, or it's a big audience, there are generally generic things. I mean, everyone likes to be praised for their intelligence, looks, success, etc. And so pretty much anything positive would work pretty well. But the more you can target it, the more effective it would be. Now, there is, of course, a bit of risk here. Namely, one way we insult people is by over-praising them. So what you have to be careful on is not go too far, because then they might see it not as flattery, but as mockery and sarcasm. In that case, you wouldn't get the desired results. And of course, if it goes, not into mockery and sarcasm, people, of course, can spot that they're being, being manipulated. So you want to make it, kind of the Goldilocks thing. Not too much so it seems mockery, not too little so it doesn't work, but just right. Other examples, well, politicians do this quite a bit. President Trump uses this tactic to talk about, when he's speaking to his base, how smart they are, how brilliant they are, how great they are, and then he presents some claim. And of course, praising them for being smart and brilliant, etc., proves nothing. But it works quite well. So if you're considering your career in politics or advertising, or just manipulating people in general, super useful. Now to the side of good. Now, the way to diffuse this is not to be to reject all praise, because we all like some praise, but it's to realize when someone is just appealing to your vanity, trying to appeal to your pride, and actually offering you reasons. So you want to be able to say, okay, are they giving me a reason to do this, or are they just trying to butter me up to get me to accept a claim that I have no reason to accept? Now you can still decide to go along with it anyways, of course, but logically, if they're merely appealing to your pride, they give you no reasons to accept the claim. So what about things that may look like this fallacy, but are not? Well, first, there could be things that make you feel pride that actually provide completely legitimate reasons to accept a claim. For example, someone may say, suppose you're really good at organizing things, you're really good at time management, and someone says, you're in an organization, and someone says, we gotta get all this stuff done really quick, it's a mess, you've got the skills we need, you are the best choice, you should accept it. Now in that case, they are indeed praising you, but the fact that you have the skills they need does logically support the claim that you are a good choice. So, it doesn't mean you have to accept the offer, but at least there's a logical connection. So there are cases which can look like flattery, but again, the question is there a legitimate connection between what's supposed to make me feel pride and the actual claim? If the answer is no, the fallacy. If the answer is yes, could be a good argument. Could still be bad, but could be good. Other exceptions, would be cases where the person is just engaged in normal, non-manipulative praise or being polite. Now, many of our praisings are just being polite to people. We say nice things about people because it's nice, it's polite. And so when someone compliments someone and they're not trying to get them to accept a claim, it wouldn't be this fallacy. So if someone, and there's an example that says, you know, Sally says to Jane, oh, you did a really great job on that business proposal, that's wonderful, congratulations on the promotion. That wouldn't be appeal to flattery, because even though she's saying nice things, she's not trying to get Jane to accept a claim just based on flattery. So merely being nice, polite, or praising doesn't become the fallacy. It has to be, here's some praise, therefore my claim is true. And again, sometimes it can be tough to spot, but that's the fundamental basis. So that's apple polishing or appeal to flattery, how to use it, how to defend against it. But if we're going to guilt, anything about apples that needs more stuff. Now, guilt can be a powerful emotion in some people. Other people are free of guilt. They're, of course, psychopaths. Now, like the other emotion fallacies, again, it works the same way. Here is something that's supposed to make you feel guilty, therefore this claim is true. As with all the others, no one who's not insane would come up to you and say, here is something that's supposed to make you feel guilty, therefore accept my claim. Because again, that would be like going up to someone and saying, here is my fake, you know, my forgery of the Mona Lisa, please buy it as if it was the real Mona Lisa. No one's going to fall for that. So what a person would do is, as always, try to target someone's guilt. So on the side of evil, the more you know about your audience, what things do they feel guilty, do they feel shame about? And the more you can push that, you know, the more you can tailor it, the more effective it will be. But of course there is a risk. If it's pushed too much, then the person can react negatively. There are limits to how much guilt and shame can be pushed, because at a certain point a person feels like guilt and they'll react, you know, I guess in a positive way. But then of course if it pushes too far, a person can become quite angry because it becomes, you know, an attack and insult. So what would be an example of how to use this? Well, for it to be a fallacy, there must not be any legitimate logical connection between the thing that's supposed to create guilt and the claim being presented. So merely presenting something that should create guilt, and even if in fact it does, doesn't count. And this, for example, wouldn't be appeal to guilt. Suppose you're playing a video game with a friend and they get really mad and rage quit, smash your controller. And then you say, hey, you just broke my $60 controller. I mean, we're friends and all, but I just can't bust my stuff. It'd be really good if you replaced that. Now that wouldn't be an appeal to guilt, because if someone breaks someone's $60 controller, it is not unreasonable to expect them to pay for it. So just because something makes us feel, or should make us feel guilt, it doesn't mean it's this fallacy. So like with all the fallacies, it's not the feeling that makes it fallacy, it's that all there is feeling, no evidence. So what would be an actual example of this fallacy? Well, suppose you're going on a hunting trip, common thing in Maine, and suppose you get, you know, suppose your mother's saying, you gotta take your cousin with you. They've never been hunting, you know, for real, except for that one time where they shot a lot of people. I know they get all drunk and they shoot stuff and they have a hard time telling people from animals and they're really obnoxious, etc. But it really break their heart if they didn't get to go along with you. Now in that case, you have very good reasons not to bring that person. The fact that they get drunk and shoot stuff and can't tell people from animals, those are very good reasons not to bring that person out to the woods and give them a loaded weapon. The fact that they would feel like really bad about it doesn't give you a good reason to take them. So that'd be a simple appeal to guilt. So how do you use this? Well, again, you want to know your target. What is it that makes them feel guilty? Now, one common way the fallacy is used is kind of like with the appeal to anger. With the appeal to anger, you can get someone angry at one thing and sort of transfer that to something unrelated. Similar with appeal to guilt. A person can get someone feeling guilty about one thing and transfer it to something else. So like Valentine's Day was like a while ago, and if a person happened to like forget that somehow, a person may use that guilt to get something outside of the person, like, oh, you forgot Valentine's Day, you know, you should probably give me some fancy present now. And that'd be an appeal to guilt, because missing it then doesn't entail a person should like buy them something expensive now. Now, one of the challenges of sorting out if it's appeal to guilt or not is a problem of actual values, namely these questions. When should you actually feel guilty about something? So if it's legitimate guilt, that's fine. If someone really has done something wrong and the conclusion is relevant, I have done something wrong, I should write that, or make amends, not bad logic. So one key question is, when should I feel guilt? Which is a matter of value. People have very differing views. Some people believe that when someone does somebody else wrong or fails to do something right, then guilt is legitimate. Other people have no sense of guilt. They feel no guilt or shame about anything. So they think any attempt to guilt them is always bad. And other people are some people have extreme guilt. They just, they're perfect targets for this because they feel guilty about everything, even when they probably shouldn't. So one question is, when should one feel guilt? Now philosophically, my own view is, if a person has done something wrong, or they failed to do something right that they should have done, then they should feel guilt. Otherwise, no. Then the next question is not only like, once you decide, okay, I should be feeling guilty, there's a question of degree. How guilty should I feel? And that would be in terms of like how much I should do to offset it. Now in some cases you can have a clear measure. If I bust somebody's $60 controller when I'm rage quitting, which I've never done, I've had it done to me by my controllers. But in that case, the appropriate payback would be a new controller, a controller for a controller type of deal, like in the Old Testament, controller for a controller, Xbox for an Xbox. So that question would be, how much do you actually owe? And the fallacy can slide in either way, trying to get guilt when you shouldn't, trying to over-guilt when it doesn't match it. So the defense would be to ask those questions. One, should I feel guilty? If the answer is no, then and all they're offering is guilt, there's no connection, just the fallacy. Or if they're over-guilting, then it can be seen potentially as a fallacy as well. Interestingly enough, supposedly it is claimed that the current generation, I guess you, are the guiltiest people in history. Not in the sense of being guilty of all kinds of stuff, but the claim is, like psychologists, that people feel a lot of guilt today. And apparently the reason why is because of standardized testing and social media, which is supposedly ruining everything. So I guess it'd be more effective today. So that's the guilt trip. Before going to the worst of all emotions, namely hope, anything about guilt, or how to use it, or how to defend against it, it needs more stuff. Oh, also, again, another exception is, there are cases where someone might try to make someone feel guilty about something, but not advance any claim. They might just say, oh, remember the time you forgot our anniversary, and then do nothing with it besides try to cut the person emotionally. And so in that case, it's not the fallacy, it's possibly just being kind of maybe mean. And so just because someone brings up something to make someone feel guilt need not be this fallacy, because that could just be being mean or trying to manipulate the person. If they try to get them to accept a claim based on guilt, though, that'd be the actual fallacy. Because to be a fallacy, it's always got to be an argument. That's just the mechanism of it. Hope. The most dangerous of emotions. Now in the old story of Pandora's box, of course, the idea is that Pandora is given a box that contains all the evils in the world. And before then, I guess there were no evil, supposedly. And in the story, since it's a Greek story, it ends terribly, because all Greek stories end terribly. Her curiosity gets the better of her, and she opens the box. And all the evils fly out into the world. And the last evil of all is called, of course, hope, the greatest evil of all. So Greeks are pretty depressing. Now, hope is the evil that underlies wishful thinking. And here's how it works. What a person does is they invoke the emotion or feeling of wishful, wishing or hoping. Therefore, they conclude, because of their hope, the claim is therefore true. Alternatively, it could be that the claim is not true. They want to deny it. Now, psychologically, this is very powerful because hope is the greatest of evils and a very strong emotion. And so it can really fuel bad logic. Now, this is typically self-inflicted. A person may try to get others into their wishful thinking, but for the most part, we damage ourselves or use bad logic on ourselves when we engage in wishful thinking. So this is self-inflicted. And so when using it, this is something you wouldn't want to use because you'd be using it against yourself. It's something you'd want to defend against. So what would be some examples of this? Well, it's really easy to fall victim. Even people who should totally know better fall victim to it. One example. Years and years ago when I was in grad school, we were in the stage when everyone's looking for jobs, which is a time of great desperation because back in those days there'd be 300 applicants for like a job in philosophy, and of course they can only hire one person. And it was sad, sad and scary times. And a friend of mine was applying for a job, and it was in his hometown, Chicago, and it's a perfect match for him. He says, I'm totally going to get this. This would be a great job for me, and he's thinking about how wonderful it's going to be. And of course we all knew better because that's just wishful thinking. I really, really wish I could get this job in my hometown, therefore I will. Total wishful thinking. Now sometimes, of course, there's being logical, pointing out that it's a mistake, but other times there's just not being a jerk. So none of us said to him, hey, that's just wishful thinking, because we were all sad too, because no one was getting jobs, and you don't make sad people sad. Another example in my own case. Many years ago, I was giving, I scheduled to give 4 tests in one day. And I go to start up from my Yamaha, and the key breaks. I'm like, crap. And so I'm like, this is going to be a disaster. I've got 4 classes of people, waiting for me with these tests. This is going to be a nightmare, doing all those makeups. And then I thought to myself, well, surely it's got to work because otherwise it would just be terrible. This can't be happening. And then immediately, of course, I told myself, that is wishful thinking. Now, I was able to save the day because it's risky, but if you ever get a key broken off in something, it's super risky, but you can take a tiny drop of super glue, put it on the part of the key you got, very tiny drop, and carefully thread it through without hitting the side, hold it in place, and then extract the key. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you get the key stuck to the ignition and you doubly screw. Sometimes that works. That would work, and I had a spare key, and the day was saved. But not by wishful thinking. That never saves the day. Other examples, one that I encountered, my first class in philosophy. We were talking about afterlife. Is there life after death? And of course, someone gave the usual terrible argument. I really, really want there to be an afterlife. Life has no meaning if we don't have it. Therefore, there must be an afterlife. And of course, that's a terrible argument because just because we want it doesn't make it true. And the easy way to test that is just put something in here that's totally silly, but you might want. For example, it'd be really cool if there were like unicorns. That'd be awesome. But that doesn't make it true. It'd be really cool if I had $1 billion. But that's not going to come true just because I wish for it. And so we can see in those cases, clearly not true. Now, again, this is something you wouldn't want to use unless the only time you want to use it is for pragmatic reasons. If for some reason you had to delude yourself into thinking happy thoughts, because the alternative would be like super terrible. So if you are in a scenario where you do have to delude yourself because the alternative is just too terrible, then I guess this would be doable. Not for logical reasons, but for pragmatic reasons. Now in terms of defending against it, the defense is basically ask yourself, okay, I really want this, but is this actually true? Is this realistic? For example, everyone says this friend, where they don't plan, they just burn through their money, and if you ask them like, okay, you spent all this money, how are you going to pay your rent? And they always say, it will just work out. And the worst thing is for those people, it often does, which is, I guess, good, but super annoying. And so, but a realistic thing would be to say, well, will it just work out? Will money just appear out of nowhere? Will I just like win the lottery or something? And usually the answer is probably not. So the defense is not like being, totally pessimistic and expecting the worst in everything, but to be realistic, to say, do I have a reason to believe this is true? Or am I just really hoping it? Now, in terms of like niceness, again, in some cases, and this is a moral judgment, it's the right thing to do to tell people they're engaged in wishful thinking. So if you have a friend who, they have just enough to like pay their rent and they're planning on like just blowing all their money on something stupid, I mean, it's their free choice, but you might want to tell them, if they say it's all going to work out, that you might say to them, is it going to work out? Is it really? Are you sure? And then you might have just saved them for some trouble. Other cases, like if, there's a plane crash and, really bad one, and you're talking to, a family member, one of the people on the plane, and they say, I know they're all right, I know they're all right. You don't say to them, that's just wishful thinking. They're totally dead. No one could have survived that. You let them do what they gotta do to get through it. Which again has nothing to do with logic, it's a moral question. When should you call people on wishful thinking? And sometimes you should, and sometimes it would be pretty terrible to go up and point out to people their hope is totally unfounded. Now, this fallacy underlies a lot of really well-selling books. Every so often, there's like a cycle of these positive thinking books that, and some go so far as to say that if you really wish for something, really want it, think positively about it, you will get it. The last one, kind of big one that I recall, was a book called The Secret. And The Secret was basically wishful thinking. And the claim was, literally, that if you just really, really visualize something and wanted it, you would just get it. And of course, as you might imagine, anybody who knows critical thinking was saying, yeah, that doesn't work. And of course, it's actually testable. We can try this right now. Everyone really, really wish hard for $1 billion. Nope, the hands are still empty. Sad. I just not wishing hard enough. Yeah, so the positive thinking things where if you think hard enough about it or wish hard enough for it, you'll get it, that's just this fallacy. But wait, someone might say, does this mean that thinking positively and having goals and so forth, that doesn't work? Well, yeah, that works. Thinking positively and having goals does help. But of course, if you don't do stuff, you're not going to get results. Wishing doesn't do it. So, yeah, positive attitude does help in getting things done. Because if you have a negative attitude, I'm never going to succeed, fail at everything, probably not going to even try. Especially in, like sports. As they say, 90% of sports is physical, the other half mental. And it is true that even though, obviously a lot depends on training, experience, and condition, etc., but how a person thinks about it does make a big difference. Especially like in endurance sports where, your mind can't like make you keep running like if you're totally, done. But it's the difference between just giving up when you could keep on going and keeping on going. So yeah, being positive can be, a real thing, but just being positive doesn't do it by itself. I mean, a final example of this is like in the sports movies. If you have a team that's like totally terrible, but the coach gives a super good speech and they're all inspired, and the movies, of course, they tend to win, but in reality, a good speech that inspires them is not going to overcome lack of ability and training, etc. That said, bad attitude gets you nowhere, and positive attitude of actually doing something can get you somewhere. Now, going along with this, interesting enough, which is not also in terms of getting back to the fallacy, if a person is positive about stuff, it need not be the fallacy. So if someone is, talking about, I feel really good about this, and this is a good plan, a good idea, this is going to be a success, that wouldn't be wishful thinking by itself. Wishful thinking occurs when there's no reason beyond hope to accept it. So just because someone's feeling positive or giving a pep talk, to say how you're committing a fallacy would be a mistake, because if they're just giving a pep talk, they're not trying to prove a claim, no fallacy. if somebody's thinking positive about something and they actually do have evidence for it, again, not a fallacy. Placebo effect. Interestingly, or boringly enough, one thing that shows up in medical testing is, and it's one thing they normally have to control for, is what's called the placebo effect. And the idea is this: if people think they're getting medicine or surgery, they will believe they're getting better or feeling less pain or having some benefit. So when they do testing on people, one thing they try to do is they try to take that into account. So what they'll do is they'll give people the real, say, medicine, and give people, fake medicine, and then see what happens. And one thing that does create a problem is that placebo effect, that the people who think they're getting medicine will often exhibit positive results. Now, normally you think this would only apply to things that are primarily psychological. For example, if they were giving out testing, say, antidepressants, and someone thought, they were in trial, and they didn't know if they're getting antidepressants or not, maybe they are, and they started thinking they felt better. So in that case, you might say, well, yeah, that makes sense, it's psychological. Now, some years back, and also, again, recently, some doctors and researchers looked at the question, would this also work with surgery? Because you'd think that surgery, there'd be no placebo effect, that you do the surgery, and either, the surgery works, and you can't have a placebo surgery effect, because it's like actually working on something. To use an analogy, it'd be kind of like you're trying to get like a placebo effect in your car, trying to make it think it had gas in it. That wouldn't work. Now, interestingly enough, they found that they could create a placebo effect with surgery. That's how they did it. Now, one thing having knees yourself, you hopefully have noticed yet, but hopefully you won't notice, is that knees get all kinds of problems. They're super complicated. There's the quadriceps tendon, the patella tendon, the ACL, MCL, all kinds of stuff in there. And if you've done sports, or know people in sports or watch sports, those things are always getting torn, etc. And just through normal wear and tear, you start messing up parts of your knees, like meniscus, etc. So you'll see as you get older, or if you've do sports. Now, there's a surgery that's done to go in there and kind of clean out the junk in the knee. And the question was, the people have been doing this. Once they got arthroscopic surgery, cut a hole, stick in the camera on one side, go and do some stuff. And they wondered, does this actually work? Does this do anything? And people did say they had to prove it. So what they did is they said, hey, let's get some people to volunteer for this study. And half the people, and we'll see how this works in more detail in the future, they were in the experimental group. So they got the surgery for real. The other people, they got no surgery, except of course they got cut. They didn't get the actual surgery. And they knew they were in this. It wasn't like the doctors were just like randomly not doing surgery on people. People enrolled, and they said to them, you'll either get the real surgery or the fake surgery. And there's all the usual release forms, etc. And the result, kind of weirdly enough, was the people who didn't get the surgery actually showed more improvement. Now, you might chalk a lot of it up to like just mental stuff, like how much pain you feel in. A lot of that is psychological. We have a surprising amount of control over the pain that we feel, and there are various ways to control it that don't involve medication. For example, they found that music is very effective. Video games, extremely effective for controlling pain, interestingly enough. They also found that on objective standards, like the range of motion, etc., the people who didn't get the surgery were better. And so it turned out that, in a way, just getting fake surgery was more effective than getting real surgery. And it was all in their minds, psychologically. And so the idea that the mind can affect results would not be this fallacy, because it can. It can have positive medical effects. And one of the weirdest things is, even when people know they're getting a placebo, it still works. So you can tell someone like, yeah, we're doing fake surgery on you, totally fake. And the person's like, totally fake, I get it. How do you feel now? I feel much better. Thank you for my fake surgery. And so there could be a, legitimate place in medicine for fake, fake medicine. And of course we can do this to ourselves, psychologically, for beneficial effects. So there's a whole interesting science and psychology here about how thinking we are better, in many cases, can make us better. Now, of course, we have to be careful of the limits of that. It's not going to, like, cure cancer, repair broken legs, etc., but it can have a very important effect. And that stuff wouldn't be wishful thinking for the important reason that it actually works. So it wouldn't be a fallacy. Okay, so quick recap. Wishful thinking is self-inflicted. It's when a person says, essentially, I wish this were true, therefore it is. Now, of course, to deceive ourselves, we can't just say to ourselves, I wish this was true, I have no reason it's true, but I accept it. We have to delude ourselves. We have to get ourselves, wishing it's true so we feel that it must be true. The defense is not to, like, abandon all hope, but to say, okay, I really want this to be true, but is it true? And to actually, and it can be hard to check, because we really, really want it to be true, then people tend to, do confirmation bias, they find things that support it, they tend to believe it anyways. So this is actually a pretty tough fallacy to defeat. Now the reason we want to defeat it is because it leads to a lot of really bad decision making, really bad choices, up to and including death. As an example, I've known people who died of cancer from wishful thinking, where they clearly have signs of cancer, and they just say, oh, it's just a mole, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing, it's nothing, and then dead. And so literally, wishful thinking can kill you. So it's good to be, have a defense against it to avoid death. Most cases are less than death, but it generally leads to, bad results. Before pressing on, anything about flattery, guilt, or hope that needs more stuff? These next few fallacies rely primarily on people wanting to be in groups, either accepting because they're afraid to reject, or accepting because of pride in that group. And here's how they work. The first one is the peer pressure fallacy. And we know probably from way back the after school specials, that peer pressure is, of course, pressure being put on us by our peers, fellow people in our own age, range, etc. Now, peer pressure by itself is not a fallacy. It's just a social phenomenon that people are influenced by those in their groups. Where the fallacy occurs is this. What occurs is, and it's essentially, again, it's an offensive fallacy used against other people, typically. Although one could probably indirectly do it to themselves. So the definition is this. It's when a person accepts a claim based not on actual evidence, but because they fear being rejected by their peer group. So it's, in a way, it's somewhat like a variation on scare tactics. The idea is basically believe this, or this group that you identify with will reject you. And so it's often used in fairly minor things. So like if a person wants to dress a certain way, but it's not cool, and they really, and their peer group kind of leans on them like, oh, I can't believe you're wearing those boots, they're so last year. And they say, oh, of course I'm going to change my boots. That would be peer pressure. Or changes, political beliefs. If someone, leans on someone based on their, well, to use a concrete example, suppose you have a Democrat who's pro-gun, and their fellow Democrats say, if you want to be cool like the rest of those Democrats, you can't be pro-gun, and they say, okay, I'm anti-gun now, that'd be peer pressure. So the idea is basically it's a threat of rejection by the group. If you want to be in this group, accept this claim. And logically, of course, there's no connection. If someone were to say, if you want to remain in our anti-math group, you must accept 2 + 2 is 5. Well, of course that wouldn't fall, that'd be stupid. And so when people do this, obviously they don't, just like I gave the examples before, someone doesn't say, here's some counterfeit money, accept my counterfeit money. So what someone would do is they would be more, subtle in their threat. But the idea is it relies on that psychological fear to accept the claim or face rejection. Now to use this, of course, you always want to know your audience. Do they really, really want to be in the group, and will they believe things that are not true just because their pressure is put on them? And many people will believe stuff that's not true just to stay in the group, because people like, groups. The defense against it is to basically ask yourself, okay, is there a connection? Are they giving me a logical reason to accept this claim? Like if someone's like a pro-gun Democrat, the Democrats are putting pressure on them, like if you want to be in our Democratic group, you got to reject the guns. And the person will look at it and say, well, I'm being threatened with rejection, therefore guns are bad. Well, it doesn't follow. So defense is basically asking, is there a connection? Now, as with scare tactics, we want to distinguish between what we might call practical or prudential reasons and logical reasons. So, for example, suppose someone's a pro-gun, anti-abortion Democrat. But of course, if they were trying to run for office as a Democrat on those views, they probably would not make it to the primary. So from a practical standpoint, even if a Democrat is, say, pro-gun, anti-abortion, they should probably not, act on that or make that known. If they, as a practical matter, if they want to stay in the, successful in their primary. And similar with Republicans, if you have like an anti-gun, pro-choice Republican, they probably wouldn't want to bring that up around primary time because they get knocked out. Again, logically, you won't win your primary if you hold that view, therefore your view is false, doesn't follow. But pragmatically, would give them a practical reason. So on the side of good, the way to defend against it is ask yourself, well, does this give me a reason? In the case of peer pressure, no. Now there's also, again, the practical question. Is it worth it to me to act as if I believe this, or even actually believe it, even though I don't accept it, just to stay in my group? And that's a matter of value, a moral question. How much am I willing to give up in terms of my beliefs to belong to a group? Bandwagon. Now the bandwagon is kind of similar to peer pressure with one major difference. Now in general in life, do we want to be losers? No, and we don't want to associate with losers. We want to be winners. So psychologically, we tend to want to go along with winners. And the fallacy or bad reasoning is this. Is when someone says this side or position is winning, therefore I'll accept it as true. Now, of course, logically there's no connection, because unless one believes that winning makes things true, there's not a connection. So a candidate could win an election but still be terrible. A policy could be accepted and still be the stupidest thing ever thought of. So really, because something won doesn't mean it is good, correct, or right. Unless you just want to take the view that whatever wins is automatically the best. Now this is often self-inflicted. I mean, again, people won't say, this candidate is winning, therefore I accept them as the best, because they went through that kind of analysis, they realize, wow, this is not very good logic. It's done, more emotionally. They feel the person is winning and they want to be on the winning side, so they just kind of accept the claim without a lot of thought. Now you can also try to get people to bandwagon themselves by talking about how much you're winning. And if you convince people you're winning and winning and winning, and you talk about winning all the time, they'll often bandwagon themselves. They'll want to get on that bandwagon. And our president used that very effectively. I don't know if he was consciously aware of this, but he's always talking about winning, winning, winning. And that does create the bandwagon effect. People want to get on winning. Now, it also becomes an effective thing that becomes, in a way, a self-fulfilling prophecy, in that once a candidate starts winning, they get more resources, and then they win more. Because one of the things we'll see play out again, just like we've seen in previous elections, there'll be candidates kind of like moving up in the polls and down in the polls, etc. But once one becomes kind of a clear leader, they'll suddenly get a big surge because everyone else will kind of go to them. In a way, it's literally like a popularity contest. Whoever is the most popular gets the most people, they win. So the defense is saying, okay, that side is like winning and stuff, but is it actually correct? Now again, just like with other matters, there are pragmatic concerns, because who wants to be a loser, who want to be winners? So pragmatically, someone may go along with something that's winning, or candidates that's winning, even though they don't believe it. For example, back when Trump was considered a joke, many Republicans were saying terrible things about him, like Lindsey Graham. But now, of course, when he became president and he won, they all kind of want to be at least get along with him. And because they're pragmatic, they presumably haven't changed their views of him, but they know that he won, so they go along. Similarly with like Democrats. If you're someone who says really terrible things about a Democrat and they win, the Democrats are generally going to go back to being, nice, because they're pragmatic. They know that picking fights with the president politically is not usually a winner. Groupthink. Now, groupthink is different from peer pressure because in groupthink, it's not that the person is threatened with rejection. What they're motivated by is pride. But it's not like an appeal to flattery, because groupthink is typically self-inflicted. Now, just like with bandwagon, you can kind of encourage people to, groupthink themselves, try to motivate them to do that. But in general, people self-inflict it. And here's what it looks like. So the form is this. In place of evidence, what's given is a person's pride in their group. And it could be any group. It could be a political party, Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, etc. It could be a religion, Baptist, Mormon, Hinduism, Judaism, etc. It could be being a fan of a sports team, being a Patriots fan, or a Red Sox fan, or a Vikings fan. It could be pride in a community, that you're from Ohio, or you're from Sacramento. It could be ethnicity, it could be language, it could be anything by which people can form a group, which is pretty much anything. Now again, if someone went through the steps sort of openly, they wouldn't fall for it. If someone said, I feel pride in my group, therefore my group's claim is true, if they're going through that much self-reflection, they realize, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And so what people do is they feel that pride, and then because of that pride, they accept their group's claim is true. Now, like with any fallacy, the group's claim could actually be true, because a fallacy doesn't mean the claim is false. It just means the logic is bad. So a person could be chock full of fallacies and still be getting claims right. They're just going about it a bad way. Just like a person could guess on a math test and get things right, but they're not really doing the math. So, what would be an example of this? Well, politics provides good examples. If someone, is asked, why do you support gun control, and someone says, well, I'm really proud of all of my fellow Democrats, especially the young students who are, speaking out against gun violence. Now, it may be true that we should have gun control, maybe that is true, but because someone feels pride in the Democrats, doesn't prove the claim is true. Likewise, if someone says, why are you opposed to gun control, and they say, well, I'm so proud of, my fellow Republicans, my fellow gun owners, that we reject this tyranny against the Second Amendment, well, that doesn't prove it either. It may be true that gun control is a terrible idea, but being proud of being in that group doesn't doesn't prove it. So the defense on the side of good is to say, well, I feel pride in this group, but does that make the claim true? Is that claim actually true? The way to use it in terms against others is try to make them feel pride in the group and try to get them to accept this claim. Basically, to try to get them to self-inflict groupthink. And it's commonly done in politics. You know, we've got elections coming up in 600-something days, and we're already seeing this, you know, where the people are basically believing or accepting things because they express pride in their group. Religious beliefs, political beliefs, also tend to be like this. People believe it because they're proud of being that religion, or proud of, you know, or if someone says, why do you think the Red Sox are going to win? Well, I'm proud to be a Red Sox fan. But of course, being proud of being a Red Sox fan doesn't prove that they will win. Now, a variation on groupthink is nationalism. And you could actually kind of take nationalism and just kind of jam it into groupthink, but we'll, you know, break it out as a separate thing, just because the book does. Now, nationalism itself is not a fallacy. So when you hear people talking about nationalists or even white nationalists, that's not like a fallacy. So being a nationalist is not a fallacy. Being engaged in nationalism is not a fallacy. So nationalism essentially is pride in one's nation. And this, especially today when you hear talk about white nationalists, it becomes kind of a very complicated political and moral issue. Looked at purely neutrally, nationalism would be pride in one's nation, which need not necessarily be a bad thing, because a person could feel pride in their own nation, but not like hate everybody else either. Although it has been argued that nationalism is inherently a negative thing, kind of like racism, where being proud of one's nation this way entails that one sees other nations as inferior or bad. But if we want to be neutral, we can just say nationalism neutrally is the view that one has pride in one's nation. Now, this could manifest in various, you know, problematic ways, like with strong racist overtones, with hatred of other nations, which is often how it's presented, but going neutrally, it's simply pride in one's nation. And so the way the fallacy works is a person feels pride in their nation, therefore this claim is true. Now again, this is self-inflicted typically, although you can encourage others to self-inflict. And if people actually saw the structure, they wouldn't fall for it. So if someone's sitting there saying, yes, I feel a great pride in America, therefore the wall must be built. Well, people realize, yeah, that pride doesn't prove that. So what people do is, of course, they delude themselves to their pride. They feel this full of pride, and they accept a claim. For example, when people say America, you know, love or leave it, as a criticism of people who are critical of what the United States might do, they're doing this fallacy. They're basically saying, you know, they feel pride, their claim must be true. Anyone who is against them must be wrong because of their pride in their country. So the mistake being made here is not having pride in this country. That unless it becomes something, you know, evil and pernicious, becomes, you know, infected with racism and hatred of other nations. Nationalism need not be bad, but to reason that I'm proud of my country, therefore these claims are true, is just bad logic. Now the claims might actually be totally true, but there's no connection. So on the side of evil, the way you do this or use it is basically trying to appeal to people's pride to get them to accept claims. And again, a person who's, you know, fairly skilled in this would be Donald Trump and other politicians. They try to get people to feel proud of the country or nationalism, and then they accept claims that have no connection. The defense is not to like hate your nation or hate your country, but to, you know, ask the logical question. Okay, suppose I do feel pride in my country. Is this claim actually true? Are there reasons being given? If there's no reasons being given, there's no reasons being given. Now, as with all the other fallacies, there can be things that make you feel pride that do support a claim. They serve as real evidence, but you have to be proud of them and then accept the claim. But as long as they actually provide evidence, it's not the pride that matters, it's the claim. And lastly, as I mentioned, nationalism itself, or being proud of one's country, is not inherently a fallacy. So if an example says, Bill is super proud of America and always celebrates the 4th of July and drives around town with an American flag on his truck, Bill is committing the nationalist fallacy. And the answer would be false, because he's just being, patriotic and stuff. So feeling pride in one's nation, not a fallacy. But feeling pride and therefore accepting a claim is true because of it, that would be the mistake, the fallacy. And again, the defense is not like hating one's country, it is basically saying, but is this connected? Does this support that? Okay, so we've seen the various emotional fallacies. So if you want to manipulate people through their emotions on the side of evil, those are very useful tools. And using them effectively requires knowing which emotions will work best for your audience. So do you have like an angry audience, a scared audience? Those can be very effective. And of course, you don't have to use just one. In the course of a political speech, you'll typically see a skilled politician include a wide range of fallacies. They'll often bring out, appeal to anger, appeal to fear, bring in some, appeals to nationalism, and work all that stuff in there. Although politicians tend to have more sort of signature approaches. For example, President Obama tended to be more positive, generally not appeals to scare tactics, etc., more positive appeals. President Trump is more scare tactics and appeal to anger. Because it can be, even though like peanut butter and chocolate go together great, trying to like pack like fear, anger, and like hope into a speech can be kind of messy. Doable, but kind of messy. Because it's kind of hard to say, you're all going to die, but everything's great. It doesn't always work. So know your audience on the side of evil, pick the appropriate fallacy, and craft it to match your target. On the side of good, basically ask yourself, okay, this is trying to pull at my emotions, but am I being given any reasons? Am I being paid in real logical currency, or is it merely counterfeits? Before pressing on to non-emotional fallacies, anything about the emotional ones that needs more stuff? Now, there are psychological fallacies that are not based on feelings, but they are still quite effective. And since they're fallacies, they have the same definition, general definition. They're arguments in which the premises offered do not logically support the conclusion. So they're arguments, they're just bad arguments. And as always, just because there's a fallacy occurring, it doesn't mean the conclusion must be false, it just means the logic is bad. You get a bad logic with a true conclusion. And as with the emotional-based ones, as we'll see, there are things that look like these non-emotional fallacies that are not actual fallacies. Now the first pair we'll look at is really more of a tactic than a strict fallacy. There's some debate in the fallacy community whether we should consider this like a fallacy or more of a rhetorical technique. It can kind of go either way, depending how you formulate it. And this is the smokescreen / red herring. They're similar, they kind of get similar results, but they do it in different ways. Kind of like, these are a bad analogy, kind of like Android versus iPhone. So what is the smokescreen? Well, first the metaphor. Back in World War I, before the development of radar, when they had the German submarines trying to sink Allied shipping, what the destroyers would do is burn, this oil that would create a smokescreen. The principle that if you can't see the ships, it's harder to shoot them. And then in modern warfare, and I guess in probably games like Call of Duty, they have smoke grenades. And the idea is that smoke doesn't protect you, it doesn't stop bullets, but it makes it harder for someone to see you to shoot you. So what is the fallacy, smoke screen fallacy? Well, it's not taking a smoke grenade, throwing it on someone during the debate, although that could be hilarious. I'd like to see Bernie Sanders do that up on stage. That would be funny. But it's this. What a person does is, instead of engaging with the actual issue, they create a verbal smoke screen. They just keep piling on details and complexities until the original issue is lost in the smoke. So this is primarily a defensive tactic. So one would use this when they don't want to stick to the current issue. Why might someone want to not be on the current issue? Well, sticking to it could be embarrassing, it could be harmful to them, or they may have something else they'd rather talk about. But there's something about the current issue that they don't want to be talking about. Like a good example would be, well, we have politicians running for office, and so, for example, if someone asked Elizabeth Warren about her Native American ancestry, that's been kind of a problem for her. She probably doesn't want that, being brought up. Or another politician, on the Republican side has some scandal or some problem in their past, they probably don't want that brought up. And so one way to kind of get away from that, if you don't want to answer a question or have to stick with the issue, is smokescreen. Just keep bringing in all these complexities to try to hide the original issue in the smoke. Now, doing an example would take a long time because I have to put all the stuff out there. But we do see examples of politicians doing this. Like someone will bring up a question in an interview, and what they'll often try to do is kind of like run out the clock. So one way this technique is used by politicians, or if there's time limit, is they know that there's only so much time, like a soundbite, and eventually the interviewer is going to give up. So if they can kind of smoke screen it, they know that the person's just going to move on to something else, typically. And if you watch interviews with politicians or celebrities in trouble, you've seen smoke screen. They'll just keep going off on these complexities and so forth, in the hopes that the person will just move on. Now, if the clock can't be run out, then the idea is basically to make it so lost in the smoke that the person still just gives up, or you can get someone off on some other issue. Now, in some cases, there can be things that seem to be smoke screening. There are people who give like incredibly long, complicated answers, and they're not trying to get off the issue. They just have all this stuff they want to say, which can seem like smoke screening. And so a lot of it depends on the intent. If they're doing it to get away from the original issue, smoke screening. If they're the sort of person who wants to bring in like every kind of complexity, then they're not smoke screening, they're just bringing in too much. For example, if you talk to a historian about building the border wall, there's a decent chance they may start talking about Hadrian's Wall in Britain, built to keep out, by the Romans keep out the British, and talk about how that doesn't work. And they might talk about other walls constructed throughout history. And they're not smoke screening, they just know a lot about walls, they got that PhD, and they want to get all that hard-earned wall information out there. So you'd want to ask, if it matters, are they like smoke screening, or do they just really want to get all that information out there? Now, on the side of evil, here's basically how to use the technique. Someone is raising a question or an issue, and you'd rather not be answering that question or talking about that issue. So what you do is you start bringing in all these complexities. Like if someone's accused of making a sexist remark, bringing in complexity, but what is sexism actually? What could that possibly mean? And then eventually people just give up and cut out the plan. On the side of good, if someone started smoke screening, you'd want to kind of blow away the smoke and get them to get back to the original issue, which can be hard. It becomes a battle of they're trying to blow smoke and you're trying to clear it away, which can look pretty ridiculous at times. But if it's important enough, like if you're an interviewer interviewing a political candidate, then you want to keep them to it. Second, the red herring. The red herring also gets its name metaphorically. Here's the idea. when training dogs to hunt, you can use an example like beagles for hunting rabbits. The idea is basically use the dogs to track down whatever it is you're hunting, like the rabbits. And so you'd want the dog to follow rabbits and not other stuff. And so one of the tests, supposedly, is what they would do is once they train a hunting dog that's supposed to track, is they would let loose a rabbit to put down a trail, and they would take a red herring, which is a very stinky fish, and kind of rub it across the trail to try to lead it away. And if the dog can discern between the rabbit and the red herring and stick on the original trail, it's avoiding that red herring. So how does this apply to critical thinking and logic? Well, it's not that you take a stinky fish and get up there and just wallop your opponent, which will also be something funny to see in a presidential debate. It's this. What a person does is, there is the original issue. So whatever the issue is. Their sexist remark they made, on a hot mic, the lipstick on their collar, that's not their wife's, whatever issue that happens to be under discussion. And so what a person does is, instead of sticking with that issue, they throw out another issue in the hopes of distracting the person. So the idea is basically, it's kind of like, to use another analogy, it's kind of like trying to distract a dog by throwing the ball, get its attention away from something else. Or like in the movie Up, the whole squirrel thing. So the idea is, here's the original issue. For whatever reason, the person does not want to talk about that issue. They want it to be about something else. Because it's bad for them, they have no good answer, it's embarrassing, they'd rather talk about something they think is more important. And so what they do is throw out another issue to distract attention away from that. Now, there's many ways to do this, so there's not like one fixed way, but one common way that people do this is there'll be an issue brought up against them about something they've done, like they said or did something sexist. And what people often do is throw out an accusation against the person, say, challenging or questioning that they did something bad too. For example, suppose you have two people share an apartment and they're supposed to split the chores. So like this time, one person is supposed to be cleaning the apartment, and the other person is supposed to go grocery shopping. And so the person who was at home, supposed to be doing the grocery shopping, instead was playing beta of Anthem all day. No cleaning, just a lot of video gaming. And then they hear, the person pulls in, they're like, crap, I haven't done anything. And they realize when the person comes in, they have no groceries. So the person who's just arrived says, this apartment is a mess. You promised you were going to clean this apartment up, you didn't do anything. You just play video games all day. That's terrible. And of course, what the person would do is say back to them, I don't see any groceries in your hands, you're supposed to get the groceries. And what they've done is a red herring. They switched the issue. The original issue is they didn't do any cleaning. And they're trying to push it on the issue of the other person didn't get the groceries. Now, it is fair, of course, if someone was supposed to do something, to point out they didn't do it. But the person's not getting the groceries is not relevant to the person not doing the cleaning. They should have done the cleaning, and they should have got the groceries. Another example, sometimes what people do is if they commit a particular fault, like if you have a celebrity or politician who makes some sexist or racist remark, they'll switch it to another issue. They'll say something, well, no one's perfect. I mean, that is true, but that's a separate issue. The fact that no one's perfect doesn't relate to this person, say, sexist remarks or harassing behavior. And so the basic tactic is, here's the original issue, and again, the way you use this is, you don't want to talk about that for some reason. So you want to bring up another issue to try to get the person distracted, to try to move the conversation there. Now the defense against it, we'll close with this, is to not let the conversation switch. So if someone, imagine you're interviewing someone they've been accused of, some harassment or sexist remarks, and they say, well, no one's perfect, instead of getting off the tangent of human perfection, push it back to the original issue. Like, what is, is this actually true? So the idea is basically defense is try to keep it on the original issue. Interestingly enough, politicians generally are able to walk over interviewers pretty easy. Rarely do you see someone calling a politician on that. Occasionally you do, which is pretty startling, refreshing, but usually they'll just let them just kind of run off on some other tangent instead of tying them to that issue. But again, once in a while you'll see a politician do that, and you can see the shock on the politician's or speaker's face that they actually are getting called out on this. But that should be the standard. I mean, when people are doing interviews, etc., they shouldn't let them just run off on other issues. Okay, so that takes us to the end of Smokescreen Red Herring. On the Thursday, we'll turn to Everyone Knows, the argument of popularity, then the appeal to common practice, and the appeal to tradition, and we'll see what those are and how they differ. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on the Thursday.